Hello, global gardeners. It's Monday. Let's talk gardening. I missed you all last week, and it's great to be back. Been getting a lot of gardening done. Weather's been pretty nice here, and my plants are doing great. So, when we get out in the garden and things are going great, we can just sit back and enjoy what's happening. But throughout the course of the season, I'm constantly looking for ways to save money in how I do my gardening. So much effort I do in the garden is because I can save money when I do it myself. I love doing it, but by doing some of my bigger projects in particular, I don't have to hire someone to do it. I can do it at my own pace. It fits within my budget and my timing. And that's how I approach most of gardening. Now, I've said it many, many times. Each of our gardens is unique, and how we garden is completely up to us. You don't need to do something because somebody else tells you to do it. You can do it however you want to do it. But I think if we really look at the underlying way we garden, we often, all of us, are trying to find ways to save money along the way. And I think it's important if we start gardening, especially for new gardeners, start gardening as frugal gardeners. It will stay with us during our entire journey. So I'll be talking a lot about that over the course of this morning. And I encourage you to share your tips as well as to how you save money in the garden. And often it's just a few pennies, but over the course of a long garden journey, that begins to add up. And I think there's definitely a patience factor when it comes to saving money. Patience is so important in gardening. My peach tree is loaded with peaches. I did the video recently where I was thinning out the peaches. It looks great, but it took 4 years before I got peaches on that tree. And there are many things like that in gardening that we do. We know it's going to take years. Well, there are many things that we don't have in our gardens because they're too expensive. If we approach it the same way with some patience and with some planning, I think a lot of those things are quite doable. I've mentioned before my greenhouse that I put in a couple years ago. I started thinking about a greenhouse 20 years ago, and it was 10 years of saving and planning and research and learning about greenhouses before I actually pulled the trigger and decided to get one. That's really not much different than planting fruit trees and waiting for the first harvest, especially the first big harvest. And so start thinking about those big things that you would love to have in your garden. When I talk about greenhouses, a comment is often, "Oh, I'd love to have a greenhouse, but it's too expensive." Well, yes, it is expensive, but if you spend 10 years saving up for it, it really isn't that expensive. And if you save money in other ways in your garden, over time, you can use those savings to pay for the greenhouse. So, kind of think of today's show as the greenhouse show. All the things you can do to save money in the garden, and then you can put that money towards something like a big purchase, a greenhouse, or whatever it is you're hoping that you could one day have in your garden. Shout out to all the wonderful people here. I saw Rick is here from Australia. Tony from Simplified Gardening in Wales is here. We have Eva Nichols Art from Truckee, California. I've talked before about what a wonderful place Truckee, California is. Jeanette is in Connecticut. It's so nice to have people from all over the world. And of course, our wonderful moderators, Jay and Heidi, are with us today. So tell me what questions you might have about saving money in the garden, and then throw out your tips as I'm doing these various tips that I have. First off, and you've no doubt heard this, it is so simple. Save seeds. One of the biggest expenses we have in gardening, especially those of us that have been gardening for a while. So our gardens are in place. My beds are in place. The hoses are in place. Everything is in place. The only recurring cost for many old experienced gardeners is the seeds. And the seeds can actually be quite expensive. But if you save your seeds, you can get the cost of gardening down to essentially zero. And I love trying new varieties. This year, as I've mentioned before, and I had a couple videos about it already, I'm trying all new varieties this year. So everything I'm growing is from purchased seeds. But next year, I'm going to try to do everything that I grow from saved seed. So it doesn't have to be an either all situation. I tend to be a little extreme and do an either or all kind of thing. But you can just start with a single thing. If you find an heirloom tomato that you absolutely love, well, then save the seeds from that heirloom tomato. And next year, plant the same tomato at no cost. And you do the same thing with your cucumbers and your squash and your peppers and your carrots and your onions. And before you know it, like me, you've got jars and jars of seeds that you have saved. And all you have to do is just pull out those seeds and grow. And the reason you're saving them is because they're your favorite garden plants, or they're the plants that do best in your garden. And that's why you're saving the seeds. So before you know it, every year is a successful garden year because you're growing those plants that you know are going to do well, and you're growing the plants that you love to eat. Do it. Costs nothing. Save the seeds. I have a ton of videos on how to save seeds. Some of them, like the carrots, for instance. My carrot seed video is an extremely popular video. And one of the things I think that makes it popular is there's not a lot of videos out there about how to save carrot seeds because it takes 2 seasons. There are biennial plants like carrots that you have to leave in the ground over the winter, and in the next season, you collect the seeds. So it might take a little bit of education for you to figure out which of your plants are biennials, which of your plants are hybrid, which of your plants are heirloom, and then you can get a little more selective as to which seeds that you're going to save. But just do it. Just save the seeds. Another thing that's relatively easy to do, some of us, and it's becoming many more of us, have to pay for the water that we use in the garden. And so every time you can save a drop of water, literally save a drop of water, you're saving money. Now, a drop of water costs virtually nothing, but it costs. And here for me, when you add up all those drops of water, my water bill increases during the summer when I've got my garden. That probably is no surprise to anybody. But there are ways that you can mitigate that. First, being if you have laws that allow it, save water. And so Tony O'Neill is on here. He's got a recent video of a couple months ago, I think, where he showed his water setup. Amazing. Hundreds and hundreds of gallons of water that is saved and used for the garden. If you can have those big IBC containers filled with water, you can fill up and use those with rainwater and then water your garden on a regular basis at no cost. Here for me in Colorado, we've got laws against saving that much water, but I can save water from two 50-gallon drums. And anybody that lives in Colorado should be saving their water at least with two 50-gallon drums, or like I do, direct the flow of your water. So the downspouts, you can hook up nice tubes and direct those tubes to your plants. And every time it rains, you're watering the garden. Little things like that can make a big difference over time. So I water every day in my hot, windy, arid region, but on those rainy days, that rain is enough to not only water some of those plants on that day, but because there's so much rainfall and because I have it directed into my beds, now that's enough water for maybe 3 or 4 or 5 days just because I've directed the flow of the water. No cost to do that. All I had to do was just do some mounds, do some furrows, and swales is the term from permaculture. Build a way to direct the water flow, and I'm saving. I don't have to add it up. Sadly, I had one of my hoses that I had set up on a bed and left it on. I forgot it was on. And so I just got my water bill a couple days ago, and it's the highest it's ever been. And it was because I had a bed that ended up being watered pretty much all day long. Put your hoses on a timer if you have that issue where you're afraid that you might forget that it's watering and you're going to end up with an excessive water bill. You can also amend your soil. I love amending soil. I love adding organic matter to the soil. A soil high in organic matter is going to hold the water better. When you water, it's not going to just drain through. So if you have to pay for your water, have good, rich, amended soil, and you'll need less water less often to keep your plants well watered. Serena says it rained 1.78 inches yesterday, and someone didn't turn off their timer and had sprinklers running last night. That's what I'm talking about, especially when you get the advantage of free rainfall. It's wasted water if you've got the irrigation system going. And so Sherry's asking, what's the reason for the laws against saving water? So I live in Colorado, and the Colorado River primarily is the one that runs from the top of the Rocky Mountains to the west, to the Pacific Ocean. And then the Arkansas River runs the other direction from the top of the Rocky Mountains to the east towards the Mississippi. There are a lot of states that use water for both of these rivers, especially the Colorado River. The Colorado River runs through Arizona, runs through Nevada. It affects all the farmers in New Mexico and California, and Utah as well. So there are 6 states that are using the water from the Colorado River. And this comes from laws about 100 years ago. Chinatown is a great movie that kind of talks about this from the LA perspective, the Los Angeles perspective. The water wars to be able to control the water and where it was going and where it was coming from. Well, it was coming from Colorado and the Colorado River. And so all of that water was sold to all of those states downriver. And so it's all about water rights. And so if you have a farm that uses water from the Colorado River, you have the right to a certain amount of water. And through its full flowing force, all of the water has been allocated to somebody who paid for it, which means the residents of the state of Colorado who haven't paid for it are not legally able to save any of the rain that falls, because all of that rain is supposed to go to the Colorado River and somebody downstream has the rights. So that's where the laws come from. It's all about water usage, especially the big city of Los Angeles. And if all of us here in Colorado saved the water from the rain, there wouldn't be enough water to fulfill the rights, the legal rights of the water downstream. So it may sound silly for those of you that live in very wet regions and have lots of rivers and streams that run through, but in the dry desert southwest of the United States, water is precious. And so there's been a lot of court cases over a lot of time, and it's upheld the system of water rights. And it was just relatively recently, just a couple years ago, that the laws changed that did allow homeowners to have 2 barrels of water that they could save. So until then, most of the time I've been gardening, it was completely illegal to save any of the water. I could redirect it, but I couldn't actually save it into a container. So yeah, kind of crazy. It's one of those things. That's why each of us are gardening differently, and each of us have the challenges that we have to overcome with our garden. And for some of us, it's something like we can't even save our own rainfall. Rick is saying that's how it works in Australia. Water rights you pay each year. If drought, they can't say no water this year. You still pay. Yeah, exactly. And we've had those issues as well in drought years, that the uh, the water rights have been paid for, and if there's less rain, they still are allocated that water, and it's up to the cities, it's up to the individuals. That's when we go on water restrictions, and so we're not allowed to water our lawns, and we're not allowed to use the normal water that we would to save water that's been allocated to somebody else. It's pretty crazy. And Mobius 981 is wondering if anyone was ever prosecuted, and would love to see documentary on that. There is information out there. I know that there have been some documentaries. I know there's been a lot of legal cases. The prosecution has been more for the large scale agriculture where water was stolen or water rights were stolen, as I understand it. There isn't the prosecution so far at the homeowner level. I think I've told this story before, but I was teaching a class at the Galileo School a number of years ago, and I was talking about this issue about how you can save water in your garden, how you can have the soil so that it holds water, and that you couldn't save water. I think that was the year that maybe the laws had changed and we were going to be able to have the barrels. And I said, uh, so be ready. You'll be able to save water. If you're already doing it, don't worry. Chances are the water police are not going to knock on your door. And a hand went up in the back of the room, and I called on the woman, and she said, I am the water police. And that was actually her job here at Colorado Springs. She actually worked for the utilities department, and her job was part of her job was water management, and the policing of those laws fell within her office. And she substantiated that for the typical homeowner, as long as there wasn't an egregious violation, they weren't going to pursue it. But if someone were filling a pond in their backyard with rainwater, then I do know people have been prosecuted for that, because you can't build a pond and save the water. And the few times I'm aware of that, they had to break up the pond and release all that water back into nature. So yes, there are people in Colorado that's their job to police it, but for most of us gardeners, it really isn't that big an issue. But as Mobius is saying, it's funny but not funny. Yeah, it really is. But hey, you got to do what you got to do. And so there are other things along those lines when we are talking about the natural things that are occurring. Rainfall is one of those, and yes, saving the rainfall and using the rainfall can be beneficial for your garden. But all those other natural things in your garden, what do you mulch with? Do you go to the garden center and buy one of those bags of wood chip mulch, or do you use something like getchipdrop.com where you can get wood chips for free? Or do you go to your city? Many cities have a place where you can pick up free wood chips, because cities have a forestry office of some type. That's They're pruning the big trees, they're taking branches off when they get dangerous, and they chip up all of that wood into a big pile somewhere in your city. So if you can find out where that spot is, in almost all cases, it's free. It's just a big pile. And we've got one here in downtown Colorado Springs, and you can drive up to it, load up your truck or your car or whatever you have, however much you want to bring back home, and it's free wood chips. Great way to have a relatively permanent, long lasting mulch. So all of my trees are mulched with wood chips. My brambles are mulched with wood chips. My wildflower area is mulched with wood chips. I don't use the wood chips in the vegetable garden, but I still follow the same basic process. I use leaves from trees, crushed up leaves. I use grass clippings from mowing the lawn. Not my lawn, I don't have a lawn, but from the lawn of my neighbor and the lawn of my brother-in-law. And that's what I use as light mulches in my vegetable garden. No cost. It's a natural product. It decomposes and enriches the soil. It's food for microbes, and it doesn't cost anything to benefit my garden. I will buy straw just because I like straw. So that's the only mulch I'm actually spending money on. But when I buy straw, I get it on the day that it's on sale or that there's a discount. And I typically will buy my straw the year before. So this is where patience comes in. I'm not in a hurry to get a lot of the things I need for my garden. And so because I let my straw sit for a year in the air, in the rain, in the sun, just in case there might be any herbicide residue on it, it doesn't matter when I buy it. So I can wait until the end of the season when some of the sales begin to happen and pick up some of those straw bales. Or you can go to the ranch or farm supply store, and sometimes they've got broken bales that they'll either give away or sell to you at a greatly reduced cost because they're not going to rebale the straw. It's just lying kind of in a pile off to the side. And if you're willing to pick it up and throw it into your truck or trailer, you can get it for nothing or next to nothing. So lots of ways to have mulch in your garden without paying anything for it. And the reason I like the crushed leaves and the grass in particular is because it becomes an amendment at the end of the season. I like to do my amending in fall. And so all of those light mulches, I just turn into the soil, or I'll add a thick layer of compost on top of it. And over the course of the fall and the winter and the spring, that material begins to decompose and enrich the soil. So it's natural organic material, doesn't cost anything, starts its life or starts the end of its life as a mulch, and then is decomposed completely as a way to enrich my soil. So lots of wonderful things to be able to do if you can have that patience to wait for sales for some of the things that you might be buying. If you like buying the wood chips, if you like buying some of those other bag materials, same idea. Wait till the end of season when clearance sales happen, or look for the broken bags, the bags with holes in them that have been taped up, and they're almost always sold at a discount. So it's a great way to save a few dollars here and there as you try to figure out what you're going to do with the garden. And Sherry has a good one as well. I have a source for horse manure in my area. I'm in the middle of a large Amish community. Absolutely. And I've used free horse manure, free cow manure, free alpaca manure, free rabbit manure, free chicken manure. If you have a source of manure, access it. Manures can be a great amendment to the soil. It might even be a better addition to your compost pile. The chicken manure, for instance, is high in nitrogen. Add it to your compost pile for a boost, and you don't need to worry about aging it to deal with some of the E. coli issues that chicken manure might have, along with some of the other manures. When you use a manure, aged manure is what you should really be adding directly to your soil. But if you don't have a spot to age it, put it into your compost pile. And the bacteria in the compost pile, and especially the heat of a hot compost pile, it's going to deal with any of those pathogens that are going to be in those manures. And then you use that compost that has a manure base in your garden. When I buy compost, the bagged compost, I'm typically buying the manure based compost. It's usually cheaper, and that manure has already been composted and is free of those pathogens. So that's another approach you can take, is when you buy, it's okay to buy the cheap stuff. It's okay to buy the stuff that doesn't sound as appealing. So the let's see, the one I get has when you read the ingredients on the back, I think it says it's poultry manure in a compost, and it's like ideal. If it's chicken or turkey manure, that's great. That stuff is wonderful. And if somebody else has composted it for me, sure, I got to pay a little bit for it. But if I look hard enough, I can find those broken bags and get it at a third or half the cost. And it's the same material, it just has a broken bag. People, especially Americans, tend to be so picky about their products that if a bag has a tear in it, they think there's something defective with the material inside. No, it's the bag that was defective, not the material. So save some money by getting the leftovers, by getting the remnants, and you might be able to really, really save a bunch. Hi, Deb C. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for sharing all of your wisdom with us. Thank you for sharing all your wisdom with us. So you're so very, very welcome, and thank you for helping the channel out for so long and for as such a loyal viewer. So I do appreciate it. Thank you so much. And so I did want to mention, because I put some links in the description below, the because of the patience factor, when you identify something that you want in your garden, think about it as next year's garden or the next year after that. Too often, we just are so anxious to try something, to do something in our garden. We hear something new, we see something new, and we want to try it right now. But by waiting and doing some research and educating yourself, you can find out when is the best time to get that thing you want. And I bring it, and this is one of the reasons I start thinking about saving money in the garden, is because starting last week, Greenstock is having one of the best sales they've ever had. It's a 10th anniversary sale. I didn't realize they've been around for 10 years, but everything is on sale. And so I did a video about the new basket weave Greenstock. I love the basket weave, and my flowers are growing in it. Absolutely love it. Well, with this sale and with the Gardner Scott code discount, you can get that at almost half cost. And it's just insane. And that's what I'm talking about. If you've been wanting a Greenstock, well, then wait for the Mother's Day sale, or wait for the Father's Day sale, or now with this 10th anniversary sale, take advantage of the 10th anniversary sale. And that way you're buying something that you wanted and saving a lot of money in the process. The same with the greenhouse. When I bought my greenhouse, I waited until they were having a sale and saved hundreds of dollars by buying it on sale. The gazebo that I have in my garden that you see in the background of some of my videos, same thing. I waited and waited and waited and waited. I knew that that's what I wanted. And then when I saw a 40% discount because it was late in the season, I snapped it up. That is an important aspect. Snap it up when it reaches the point that it falls within your budget. Because in the past, some of those bigger items, I've waited and waited, and then the price fell. I waited just a little bit too long, hoping the price would fall again. And by that time, other people have already snapped it up because it's nice. It's what you want. Other people are going to want it too. But if you have the patience and if you're willing to wait for sales, you can really save some big money on some of those more expensive items that you would be using in the garden. And so I recognize, and you should recognize, that gardening is a hobby. And hobbies can be expensive. Look at some of the other hobbies that friends of yours might have, where maybe they're refurbishing cars, or maybe they're into art collection. There are a lot of hobbies out there that can be very expensive. One of the nice things about gardening is, yes, there are aspects of it that are expensive, but usually it's a one-time upfront cost. So my green stalks, I think my oldest green stalk now I've had for 4 years. It's been outside the whole time. No sign of deterioration. It still holds up well. I expect it to last forever, for as long as I'm gardening. And I never have to buy a green stalk again. I already have the green stalks I need. Now, I say that I've got 4. Who knows? I'll probably move to 5 within the next year. But the point being that for those kind of items, it's not a recurring cost. It's a one-time cost, which is why you try to buy it on sale, and then you never have to pay for it again. But you can benefit from having it in your garden. The the things like hoses. When I buy a hose in my garden, I'm always looking for the heavy duty construction hose. Excuse me. Uh, the kind of thing that's going to last a long time. This is kind of a, a dichotomy. It doesn't always sound like it's the best way to save money, but sometimes the best way to save money is to spend a little bit more money. So I'll spend a little bit more on a garden hose that is extra strong, extra durable, and will last me for years. And a lot of the garden hoses I see now have a guarantee of 3 years or 5 years or even more. Spend a little bit more for that. If you buy the cheap hose, you might save money in that year, but you're going to have to replace the hose in 1 or 2 years. And in time, you're going to end up spending more money on the cheap stuff than you will on the little more expensive stuff. My wheelbarrow is 25 years old. At the time, I spent a little bit more for a really sturdy wheelbarrow. I haven't had to buy one since. And this wheelbarrow is dinged up. The color is gone. The wood is a little cracked. I've got at least 5, probably another 10 years, if not more, in the wheelbarrow I have. I've had to replace the tires because I wear them out, but the wheelbarrow itself was an amazingly good purchase because I spent a little bit more for something that was going to last. So that's one of those things in gardening that for your tools, save money by spending a little bit more because you will not have to replace the tools. My shovels and my spades are that way. I've had the same ones for decades now because they have sturdy handles, they've got the sturdy metal, and they're going to last me for as long as I need them. I didn't get the cheap welded ones. I got the forged tools, and it makes a big difference. Gina says, I bought a top quality expanding hose thinking it would last longer. It sprung a leak after 30 days. Go with the heavy duty regular hoses. Yeah, good point. I've looked at some of those expanding hoses, the hoses you can stick in your pocket and then pull it out and water your car. And when I looked closer into those, that's what I found. They're interesting and they're unique, but they don't have the longevity. And that's really one of those things I think makes it important. Anonymous has a great tip. Buy tools from estate sales. The stuff in stores break. And so a lot of the stuff that's being made these days, yeah, the quality just isn't what it was 20 years ago or 25 years ago when I was buying a lot of my stuff. The good stuff does cost more, and most of what's being sold tends to be the cheap stuff. So go to yard sales, go to thrift shops, go to estate sales, go to places where people who have the good stuff are getting rid of the good stuff, and you might be able to benefit from it. And I've found some interesting stuff at estate sales in the past, that has lasted a long time, and it was good stuff to start with. So you may not even need to go to the the actual store to buy it. Mountains and Mayhem says, my feeling is buy the best quality I can afford and use it till it breaks while saving money for its replacement. Thrift shops can be your best friend. Absolutely. Absolutely. Uh, and, and, and that gets back to the idea of shopping for a bargain. Thrift shops are designed to be a bargain with whatever's in there. The the issue, and this is where the patience comes in, is that in spring, everybody's looking for garden tools. And so if you wait until spring to buy your garden tools from a thrift shop, you're probably not going to be able to find any garden tools unless you are lucky enough to be there when they're stocking that section. But if you wait until winter and then go to this thrift shop, you probably find some good deals. There's a lot of people out there that try gardening. They buy all the tools, they get all the stuff, and then they have a terrible year and they're impatient and they donate it all to the thrift store. And so I've seen stuff that looks brand new. And my guess is it's from someone that just gave up and didn't want to stick with it. You're not going to find that stuff in spring. You'll find that stuff in fall and winter at the end of the garden season. And so by shopping out of season, you can often find a bargain. And this is kind of the approach I take as well that Anonymous is saying. Even if a wood handle breaks, a dollar tube of epoxy, and 24 hours later, it's like new. Yeah, I will make that my first effort is to fix. If something breaks, fix it. Absolutely. And often that fix is a really cheap way of doing it. And then if the fix doesn't work, good quality tools are usually made in a way that you can replace just the handle. You don't need to replace the the, the blade of a spade or a shovel. You can just replace the handle if the handle breaks to the point that you can't repair it. And that'll save you from having to buy a whole new tool. Just replace the piece that happened to break. So absolutely, there's lots of little things like that that you can do to work the problem to your advantage. You still have the tool you like, and it'll last many years because you just fixed that one little thing that happened to break. Jen has a green stock question. I have the mover base. Is the ultimate spinner a worthwhile upgrade? Um, I think it is. So the way the green stocks are constructed is you have the green stock that will sit on a flat base. And then you can add a mover base that has wheels. And so I like the mover base. So you can move it to a different section. I've got mine on my deck, and so I can move it out of the way. I can move it into the sun. I can move it around. That's what the mover base does. It's got little wheels on it. And then the spinner base, you can use either with the mover base or all on its own. And so, like in my greenhouse, I've got my green stock in one spot in the greenhouse. It's not being moved anywhere. So I don't need the mover base for that one. But the spinner base makes it easy to spin so that I can get different sun uh, on different days. So typically, every 2 or 3 days, I'm spinning my green stock just so the plants have a little more even distribution of sun. I like both because I can move the whole tower in or out of the way, in or out of the sun, depending on the time of the year, and then I can spin it. So I think it's a worthwhile upgrade, but it all depends on how you garden. The three green stalks I have just outside my door, two of them are on a spinner base, and one of them is on the mover base, and it's not that hard to spin it with the mover base to move the wheels in a circle. It's not that hard. It's just so easy with the spinner base that you kind of get spoiled. So it's I would say either or, depending on where you're putting the green stock. And if you can do both, yeah, it just makes it that much easier. I can literally spin my green stock with the spinner base with just two fingers. I just grab it and just pull it and it spins. Whereas the one that is on the wheels, I have to physically grab with two hands and then put a little bit of muscle into it to spin it because it weighs a lot. There's a lot of soil, and that soil is moist, which means there's a lot of water weight in those green stalks. So they stay put. They're not rolling away, even if you've got the roller base on it. And so when you spin it, it does take a little bit of effort. Sherry says there was a neighbor in my last neighborhood who couldn't look at her husband's gardening tools when he passed away. She sold everything very inexpensively. Yeah, it's sad that she lost her husband, of course, but I fully understand that concept from her perspective. But it's a win-win for gardeners who find those situations and are able to get tools. I got some tools along. I got a really nice couple really nice socket sets and some screwdrivers and wrenches from someone like that who, oh man, he had an amazing tool setup and he died, and the wife had no use for those tools and it made her sad to see them. So she got rid of them at, at almost nothing. And if you are lucky enough to find the gardening tools that fit into that category, absolutely go for it, and it'll definitely benefit you. Boothby Garden says they have a tool library in town. That's cool. You can buy an annual membership and rent tools as you need, or they sell super inexpensive used tools with no membership. That's awesome. I encourage all gardeners to get to know each other. And one of the reasons is because we all have our specialty tools. And so if you get to have some good gardener friends, you can borrow each other's tools. If and especially for the bigger, more expensive tools, one buys the expensive tool this year, and the other buys a different expensive tool next year, and you share. That's a great way to not only get to know other gardeners, but to save money. But the idea of having a library where you can check out tools, that's awesome. I'm not aware that we have one, but that's something that you could, especially if you live in a bigger town or if you live in a town with a lot of farmers, you might be able to and ranchers. I wouldn't be surprised if communities like that don't have some type of center, because ranching and farming takes a lot of tools. A lot of those tools are expensive, so it would make sense that they would have some type of center where you could check out and borrow or rent tools at a huge savings. Because I've got so many tools that I've only used once or used twice, and I like buying tools because you never know when you're going to use it again, and then sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't need it again. But the idea of having a place you could go and rent a tool for that one time you need it is a much better idea than actually spending the full price yourself. Big Wheeled Dog says sweat equity is a cost I spend most in my garden, but yes, being thoughtful when buying is smart. I bought books like Tony's along the way too, invaluable. So is try again. Absolutely. And so and I've mentioned a couple times just the idea of researching some of those things that you want in your garden or you're going to be using in your garden, and reference books I think are ideal. And so Tony O'Neill's got 3 books now, all great reference books. And that's one of the benefits of a reference book is you get that information that you're going to need because you're going to be using your sweat equity in the garden, and maybe you can find an easier way to do something. But also, a lot of these books will highlight what it is you need. And Tony and I grow in different ways. We have a lot of similarities in how we grow. Our philosophies are almost identical in how we grow. But Tony's growing on an allotment, and I've got a big backyard. I've got a lot of big raised beds. Tony grows hundreds of pounds of potatoes in containers. And so when you get these reference books, I encourage that you get varieties of books, and varieties of books from the same author, like Tony, and also variety of subjects from other authors, to get an idea of what it is that that strikes a note with you, and you say, "Oh, I like that idea, and I'm going to try it." And many, if not most, of the reference books are going to give you those money saving tips to be able to do the things you want to do with that particular method without having to basically spend full cost on it. And so Cass Makes Stuff says, I like to think they live on through the use of the tools by others. So absolutely, yeah. Tools can almost live forever, especially the good tools, and they'll definitely live on through others. So uh, it's fantastic. It's so nice. I'm seeing some good stuff here talking about weeding, and so I have some of those dedicated tools with the little fork on the top of it that is used for weeding. But yeah, some of the things I see, like that you're all talking about, like butter knives and chisels. There are lots of things we can do in our garden. You don't necessarily have to buy a dedicated tool. A weeding tool is really only intended for that one purpose, weeding, for sticking in the ground and popping out a weed. And so if you can go to the thrift store and buy a butter knife, or I actually have some um, like iron knives. They're dull, so I don't cut myself, but I use those for weeding as well. They're thick. I used them for a while in camping, and it was just a pain keeping them sharp. And I thought, wow, these would be great in the garden for weeding. And you can find all kinds of stuff like that at thrift stores. So buying tools with a single purpose is a great way to waste money. If you can find tools that have multiple purposes, that's one of the reasons why a hori hori is such a great tool. It's a knife, it's a weed puller, it's a trowel. It's got most of the hori horis, at least I've got two, the hori horis I have, and most that I see for sale also have measurements on them. So you can use it to measure the depth of a hole, especially if you're planting bulbs. And so a tool like a hori hori that has multiple uses in the garden is the kind of tool that you can save money on, because you don't need to buy each individual dedicated tool for a task. You can buy a single tool that can do all kinds of different things. I actually broke one of my trowels recently. I'd had that trowel for 20 years. It was forged, it was a single piece of metal, and I was trying to use that trowel to dig up a root. Trowels really aren't intended for prying out a root. So I used trowels to dig out roots, but there was a root that was just a little too thick, and I tried to pry it out with the trowel, and it snapped. I was just so amazed. And I was so upset with myself that I snapped my favorite trowel in half. Gets back to a hori hori. If I had been using a hori hori, I would have been able to cut through the root and I'd still have my trowel. So a great way to save money is to use the tools the way they were intended to be used, and not try to pry out a big root with a tool that isn't intended to be able to handle the force of prying out a big root. Use the right kind of tool. Concrete Jungle says, I mostly use hand tools, trowel, fork, and secateurs. Yeah, absolutely. So when you get the secateurs, and this holds true for everybody, the hand pruners is what we call them here in the States. Spend a little bit of extra money and get the good ones. Get the and if you can get the ones that actually have replaceable blades. If you snap a blade, you don't have to buy the whole tool over again. You just replace the blade. It's kind of what we were talking about earlier with handles and things that can go wrong with our tools. Just go ahead and replace the piece that needs to be replaced. And so a good set of secateurs or pruners In the 7 days a week that I'm out in my garden, at least 4 of those days, I've got a set in my pocket and ready because I'm cutting weeds, I'm pruning tomatoes, I'm cutting branches, whatever happens to be. That's one of those tools I use a lot too. So if it's a tool you use a lot, it makes sense to spend a little bit more to get the best kind. John C says good quality digging forks are great. Absolutely. My brother worked for a utility company, and their forks have metal full length of handle. You can literally jump up and down on it to get roots out. Oh, that would be fantastic. So yeah, I have a good quality garden fork, and it's different than a pitchfork. Pitchfork has really thin tines, but a good garden fork, a good digging fork, has solid iron tines, and that's the kind that you want. And yeah, if you could find one that has the full length handle, uh, oh, that would be amazing to be able to pry out whatever you wanted. But that's another one of those tools that paid a little bit extra for many years ago, and I still have the same tool. And take care of your tools. I don't do this as well as I should, but if it's got a wood handle, occasionally put some linseed oil on the handle just to keep it from drying out and cracking. And keep the metal clean. If it is stainless steel, it's not as big an issue, but there aren't as many stainless steel tools out there. Most of our tools are steel or iron based, and they'll rust. And so you got to keep them clean. If you're out there prying out something in wet soil and then you put the tool away and that wet soil stays on that metal, you might have rust start to develop. So keep the tools clean, sharpen them, especially the secateurs. Keep those blades nice and sharp. The loppers, keep those blades nice and sharp. And a sharp blade works better. So you're not forcing the tool. I know someone who was cutting with big loppers like that. The blades were so dull trying to cut through a branch, putting so much stress on the wood handles that one of the handles snapped. And I think if it would have been sharp blades, wouldn't have had that issue because it would have sliced right through the branch. So keeping things sharp and clean and oiled really can make a difference in how long they're going to last. Jersey CI Dave says, "Hori hori on my Christmas list. My daughter was in Japan but couldn't bring me one back. Serrated edge, but she could bring an 8-inch kitchen knife." Japanese knives are great. I've got some wonderful Japanese knives. But yeah, hori hori. I've got a couple videos from a few years ago about Christmas lists for gardeners, and absolutely hori hori. I think the one video, hori hori, may have been at the top of the list for what to buy at Christmas. I mean, that's how good a tool it is, and it should definitely be on your Christmas list if you don't have one, because it is a wonderful tool. So Rick is saying, not common in Australia. Dutch hoe, yes. No box store has a strip hoe. So the stirrup hoe, the strip hoe, the hoop hoe, the hula hoe. There's lots of names of that here in the States. Great tool for weeding. I have a video on weeding that I show how to use that. Absolutely great tool. But hose of all type, that's actually one of the tools that I have a whole bunch of shovel. I've got at least half a dozen, I think maybe even 8 different shovels and spades. But I only have 2 hoes. And so I don't have a Dutch hoe. And so when you're looking at hoes, the different names refer to the different blades or the angles or the size or the shape. And so that's the thing about tools, is we often will need a couple different types of tools depending on what it is we're using it for. That's why I've got so many shovels and spades, because I use them for different reasons in different places at different times, and over the years have collected all of the different tools. So that's one of those things that as you garden, again, why you want to go to the thrift stores and the estate sales and try to get some of these good tools at a reduced cost, is because the more you garden, the more tools you're going to want, because you decide you need them. You're trying something new in the garden, you're building a different section, you're growing something differently, and the tools can make a difference. And so we accumulate tools. That's just what gardeners do. It's okay. Just build that into your long-term plan and have that patience to wait until it goes on sale or wait until you find it someplace. There's a lot of projects that I do that are waiting until I have the proper tools before I can get that project done. And nothing wrong with that. Jay's been right on top of things as I've been mentioning all these videos. She's been popping up the link to the videos. And so there's the one about weeding the garden. So thank you for that, Jay. I do appreciate everything you do. And so I think Heidi was also talking about that same kind of tool that we were just talking about. Okay, let's see. I know I've missed some stuff. I'm going to go ahead and scroll up. Sherry saying the stirrup hoe is a lifesaver in a raised bed. That's where I in the video I show using a stirrup hoe in a big flat area of my garden to get rid of weeds, but I use it a lot in my beds early in the season for any of the weeds that are starting to pop up before I plant. A great way to do it. Brampton Gardener saying I need to clean up my rusty pruners. Yes, you do. Hello to Leslie in Denver. We're having some great weather here in Colorado. It makes it really nice to get out in the gardens and do a lot of the stuff that we're doing. David is saying, OMG, Gardner Scott really is a real person. Thank you for saying that. I really am a real person. Dusty Flat says, I cleared out the garden shed, put up tool holder, and could supply several gardeners with tools I didn't need. So I've been actually working on this video. I've already started filming it, and it's all about my garden shed and cleaning up my garden shed and discovering what's in the garden shed. Because I knew that there was stuff in there I didn't know about, but as I started making the video, I realized I've got a lot that's in that shed that I didn't even know I had. And that's another great way to save money for those of you that are going to be accumulating tools. For those of you that are on this long-term gardening journey, you're going to accumulate tools. Many times, I think for many gardeners, we end up buying something that we already have because we forgot we had it or we couldn't find it. And so that's one reason why I'm making this video that hopefully will be out within the next month whenever I can get around to finishing the filming of it, because that's a waste of money. When you buy the same tool 2 or 3 times when you didn't need to, you're wasting money. And if all it took was just cleaning out your shed or your garage or your storeroom to get to the stuff you use in your garden, make that effort. Like Dusty Flat says, clear it out, see what you have, and you may find the stuff that you don't need hiding in it, the stuff that is no longer part of the garden. If you, I've got some things like that, container garden kind of stuff that I just don't use anymore, but I still store it away. So have a garage sale, have a yard sale, donate it, and take the tax write-off if you want. But there are ways to actually recoup some of the expenses, or you can just give it to a gardener friend who might be at that phase of gardening, and you can donate it to a tool library if that's available in your area. But saving things you don't need is wasting space that could be used for something else. And especially when we're talking storage, some of that stuff that you're going to use on a regular basis should be ready, should be easy to find, should be right there in front. And a lot of that space is often taken up by that stuff we never use. So focus on cleaning up, and you might actually find stuff that you're planning to buy now and realize that you already have it. Will Dog says, sometimes I alter a tool for multi-use. I turned a hand shovel into a hori-hori by grinding teeth on one side and a straight edge on the other. Nice idea. Yeah. If you've got extra tools, by all means, turn them into weeders, turn them into a hori-hori if you've got the grinding tools to do that. I love that idea of making multi-use tools out of the tools that you already have. Absolutely. And that's the benefit of experience. That's the benefit of having the tools in the first place, is by learning how to do some of those do-it-yourself kind of things. And by having the tools, you can take advantage of modifying what you need to do to be able to get to um, the end result, which is a tool for a particular task. And if you need to make the tool something you already have, you save money. You don't need to go buy something new. Jay says, a tip: find a local person who acquires, repairs, and restores garden tools. Yeah, that would be awesome. And yeah, if you have that ability, sell your services to other gardeners. Absolutely. I think that's absolutely fantastic idea, is just somebody with a workshop that is looking to earn a few bucks and help you out in the process, or vice versa. You help others out and earn a few bucks in the process. CV says, thanks for the hoop video, Scott. You're very welcome. Made my EMT hoops this weekend. Fantastic. Yeah, my hoop videos, over 1 million views. It's one of my more popular videos. And so I think it's one of my better videos. I like my hoop video. So thank you for that. I'm glad it could help, because I've gotten comments from many, many people saying it has helped. And let's go ahead and use that as a segue to the picture behind us today. So this picture comes from Adam Burley, and I think we've shown pictures of Adam's garden from different perspectives at different times of year. But he sent me this recently, and I wanted to show you it. And one of the things I wanted to talk about was the hoops. Now, one of the things that Adam's done here that I really like, and so we've been talking about tools and using multi-purpose tools. You can do the same thing in your garden beds. You can design and build your beds with multiple purposes already in place. And this is what Adam has done. So when you look at this picture behind me, you'll see the hoops in these raised beds. And hoops are great. I love hoops. I advocate hoops. I keep my hoops in place throughout the growing season. You can use the hoops to cover young plants. So looking at Adam's garden, and this is a few weeks back, but you can see the young plants. And so the hoops are there. If it's cold, you throw plastic over the hoops to keep the plants warm so they don't die on a cold night. When they're young, you can throw row cover fabric over to keep insect pests out of the way. When it gets hot, you throw shade cloth over the hoops to keep the plants cool and to help with pollination issues that might be developing because it gets too hot. So having the hoops in place on a semi-permanent basis, I think, is a good idea. But even if it's just for the beginning of the season, go for it. But then the next step that I really like about these beds is, if you look at all these beds, you see the rectangular structure above the beds for holding twine or wire or netting, however you choose to trellis your plants. And so to build the beds with the hoops in place and with the trellis already in place, kind of kills two birds with one stone. That the bed is ready to go. And so you get all that work done ahead of time, get your plants growing, and all you need to do is focus on the plants. You don't need to worry about the hoops and the trellises, because you've already taken that effort. And so you can see all of the beds, even off into the distance, all of the beds have these permanent trellises in place. And I've got trellises like that in my garden as well. You don't have to use them. The trellises are in place to be used, but I've got trellises in some of my beds that are, and I'm growing plants that don't need trellising, because this year I decided to grow something different in the bed. That doesn't mean you need to remove the trellises, but having the trellises there in the first place give you a lot of options in your plant selection and deciding what you're going to grow in your beds each season. Another thing I like is the orientation of the beds. So generally, I recommend that our beds run north to south. And so the long edge is on the east side and the west side. The idea being that as the sun rises and sets, it tends to give a little more even coverage to the bed as the sun changes over the course of the season. When you have the orientation east to west, so that the long side is facing either north or south, then there tends to be, especially if you're growing big plants in the bed, the sun coverage is not as even. There tends to be more shading of the plants on the backside. But I've got beds running north south and I've got beds running east west. A lot of it depends on the plants. And so the plants or the beds that I have running north south, those are the beds I'm growing my cucumbers in that I trellis. Those are the beds that I'm growing my tomatoes in that I trellis. But the beds that are running east west, those are the beds of the lower plants that will benefit because they're just low lying, benefit from the sun, regardless of their orientation. So my strawberry beds are almost, I think all my strawberry beds are running east west, and my mint bed is running east west. So orientation is one of those things that when I'm asked the question, how should I orient my beds? Well, do both, because different plants will do fine depending on the orientation of the beds. It's not that big a deal. You can get away with growing just about anything in any bed as long as you're getting full sun. But to mix it up a little bit, like Adam does here, and to fill out the garden space to the best advantage, have beds running in different directions. So just choose your plants based on whether it has a trellis on the bed, what the sun orientation is, and it gives you lots of options, especially if you have the benefit of having a large garden where you could have multiple beds. And then, of course, I always like to point out the sitting spot. And so he's got the table with the umbrella over it, a nice place to sit. And so, yeah, take a few minutes and scan the picture. You can see in this lower corner, this looks to be blackberries, maybe raspberries that are growing. Also, when we talk about the raised beds, we do a lot of assuming that we're using our raised beds solely for vegetable gardening. And my vegetable garden is made up solely of raised beds, but I have raised beds for a lot of other things too, like flowers, bringing the pollinators in, bringing the beneficial insects in. There's no reason why you can't grow flowers in a raised bed. And for those of us with terrible soil, and so we have raised beds so that we can have good soil in our growing beds, use some of those beds for flowers. Absolutely a great idea to, when you have a lot of beds, dedicate at least one of the beds for the pollinators and the color in the garden and all those other insects that the flowers will bring. So thank you, Adam, for sharing this. There's a lot of things that if you look close, you can see. So scan this while I continue to talk, and maybe you'll see something that you can copy and use in your own garden that comes from Adam. So Rick says, placement of tall and short plant orientation, many make that mistake. Yes, many do. And that's one of those gardening mistakes that I would say all of us have made at one point or another, or if we haven't made it yet, we will, is understanding how shade affects plants and how sun affects plants. And the placement of tall versus short plants definitely makes a difference. So you're absolutely right. Many make that mistake. And so if you anticipate that ahead of time with how you place your beds and the height of the bed as well, it looks like Adam's beds are pretty much all the same size, but my taller beds are to the north because here in the northern hemisphere, the sun is in the south. And so to reduce shading, I've got the shorter beds closer to the sun and the taller beds farther away from the sun so that those shorter beds are not going to shade out the taller beds. So even the size of and shape of the bed will be influenced by the orientation and by the plants that you choose to grow in them. John says, I really like that garden layout. So convenient for protecting things, and climbers can be anywhere. Great ideas. Yeah. Thank you for saying that, John. Uh, it is, it is, it's easy access to all the beds, but it's also a great use of the space by packing in a lot of beds into the garden area. So keep looking. Lots of good things you can see in this picture behind me. Liz is saying, I made a long, skinny bed using old Christmas trees as sides. Cool. I collected them from my townies for free. The branches used to keep cats away and shelter plants in winter. Great idea. And so when we talk about, I love my raised beds. There's no reason you need to buy wood to build a raised bed. I have beds using logs. When I cut down the tree in my front yard, I have used the big branches in exactly the same way to make the sides of raised beds. And it's not pretty, but it's very useful in not spending any money to form the sides of beds. And so uh, mine are just lying flat. They're not actually connected to each other. But I'm not sure if this is what you did, Liz. If you remove all the branches and you're left with the center trunk, nail the trunks together. There's no reason why you can't attach the trunks of old Christmas trees and have an elevated bed area. So the sides are not just the height of a single trunk. They can be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 high, and by nailing them together or connecting them together in some way. So yeah, free way to build a bed and to have the edges clearly defined by using Christmas trees. Here, at least in my area, and I know most areas have this way, at the end of the year, the days after Christmas, they have places where you can throw your Christmas trees away rather than throw them away, or rather than your neighbors throwing them away. Contact your neighbors and say, hey, give me your Christmas tree. And you cut off the branches and use them to keep the cats away. And then you use the trunks to make a bed. I love that idea. That's a wonderful way to reuse something that would otherwise typically be mulched. When I was talking earlier about the free mulch piles, a lot of the mulch comes from things like Christmas trees that have been thrown away. That's what my town does. So take advantage of anything free you can use and use it. Now, if you like buying all the stuff, and if you like your garden being pristine and you're looking for a very particular image in your garden, nothing wrong with that at all. Nothing wrong. Go for it. Keep doing it. I'm just suggesting for those areas where the visual isn't as important, save some money by using the free materials that are often all around us if we just take the time to look for them, or maybe take the time to ask our neighbors for them, or find a place where our town maybe would give them away for free. Okay, let's see. I'm going to scroll up again to see if there's something I may have missed that I want to talk about. I appreciate all the conversations that have been going on in the background today, because I can see a lot of stuff about animals and tools, and all that stuff is important. Simplify gardening, Tony's talking about some of the comments, but recycle things that work. Absolutely. That's an important thing that really is an underlying theme today, is recycling what nature gives you, recycling tools, recycling the tools you have for another purpose that the tools can become. Recycling is absolutely a great way to look at gardening. And so Anonymous is saying, if this is a serious question, how do you make sand by hand? And so, one of the things that I've done that actually ties into this is is to make a screed. You take, and you can get different sizes of hardware cloth. And so you get something, I like hardware cloth because it's pretty sturdy. And so I'll build a frame and put hardware cloth on it and use that to sift my soil. So I've actually, if you want to call it making sand by hand, is sifted my soil using different sizes of a screen to do exactly that. I lived in a house 20 years ago that was very, very sandy, but the sand had really big, chunky pieces to it. Too small to call a pebble, and maybe too big to call sand. But I would do that. I would screen out my sand to get rid of those rockier pieces so that all I was left with was sand. So if you're honestly looking at how to make sand by hand, go ahead and screen it. And that might be a way that you can get to a size of soil particle that you're looking for. You can also, in large amounts, this is the way that mining was done in the Western United States, and it moved to South America and many other places of the world. But you use water you put a bucket of soil on a ramp surface and run water over it, and the different soil particles will separate down the course of that plume is what we used here in the West. The plumes would have water running to the wood, and the soil would be thrown into it. They were after gold, of course, and gold is heavy and stays behind, and everything washes away. But in the process, the silt washes away. Actually, the clay would wash away first, then the silt would wash away, and then eventually the sand would wash away. So you can separate out your soil by using water. Most people aren't willing to take that much effort, but that's a way to get some sand if you're trying to if your soil's too clayey or your soil is too sandy and you're concerned about that, definitely think about doing something like that to separate out what you have, and then you can add to it depending on what you may be deficient in. Okay, let's see. CV is saying, use Virginia creeper to choke out some knotweed along a fence line. Interesting idea to use one plant to keep another one from going or growing. Such wonderful ideas. When we talk about shading plants, it's often a bad thing. We don't want to shade our plants out because it's going to affect their growth, but you can actually use that to your advantage as well. Shade out the plants to keep them from growing if it's a weed that you're trying to get rid of. Serena says, how do you place your plants in the green stock to prevent light blockage from taller plants? And so I was just talking about this 2 days ago, as a matter of fact, with my brother. And so it depends on the plant. Green stock makes some rings, some large support rings that go around the green stock to act as trellises. And so depending on the plant, I will use those rings to keep the plant away. So like when I grow a bean, for instance, in a green stock, I'll use that to direct it away from the green stock, and the bean rests on that ring. So that's one of the things I do in my green stock to prevent the beans from growing too tall and blocking the plants behind it. And then the same with the peppers. I actually grow peppers low on the green stock, but the same idea, kind of using that trellis to keep them away from some of the other plants. But I know people that do the opposite. They put their tall plants at the top of the green stock, or they break their green stock in half, and they'll grow the tall plants on one half of the green stock, and then they're growing other plants separately in the other half of the green stock. So a couple different ways to do it. I'm sure there's a lot more options. And then just spinning it so that there's changing light because of the curve of the green stock. The plants that are on the back side aren't getting direct light from the front, but they are getting some light from the back. And then when they spin around, they're getting light from the front. So by spinning, you're actually putting light in the front and the back of the plant as it's at different points of the green stalk. And I kind of use that to my advantage as well, just to ensure that the plants are getting relatively even sunlight all the way around. And so Anonymous is saying, I got pea pebbles and wondering if there's a way to ground it up. My son was just talking about this with some gravel that he has that he wants to break up. It's a lot of work. You could do a sledgehammer. That's the whole lot. That's the only way I know is to get a sledgehammer and break all those pebbles into smaller pieces. I mean, there are big, heavy-duty machines that'll do it, but at home, probably a sledgehammer is about the only option you have to be able to break little rocks into littler rocks, and that's a lot of work. You'll see movies from the southern states here in the U.S. where they used to have the chain gangs in prisons, and that was what they did, is they broke rocks into smaller rocks. It is grueling work, and that's something that I would encourage, but it's an option. It's definitely an option that you could take and go from there. John Jude is saying, I've repurposed a twin bed frame and built my grow like setup with some welding skills involved. Cool. I haven't used it in a couple years, so you would have to go back to some of my videos from probably 4 years ago. But I did that with a bed frame in the garden. I took a bunk bed frame that had a grid on it. That's where the mattress would rest. And I use that as a trellis in the garden. I love that, to trellis my cucumbers. Great idea to take old furniture and reuse it. And especially if you've got some welding skills, use it to make a seed growing station, use it to make a trellis in your garden. But there are a lot of household furniture items that can be reused in the garden as a way to basically get something for free by reusing it. It's that recycle idea again. Absolutely. I love that idea. And when I go to thrift stores, I'm on the lookout for bed frames because I have the one and I want to find another that is similar if I can, and if I can find it. I haven't found it yet, but I will definitely snap it up if I ever do. And so when you and the kitchen items too. And so when I go to the thrift stores, I'm looking through the kitchen section as well for anything that might become a tool or a container to grow in. I did a video a long time ago. It's probably 7 years old now, where I made a little rock garden and put some succulent plants in it. And what I used for the container was a glass lampshade that I got at the thrift store. So there's lots of things you can find at thrift stores for all different aspects of gardening, not just the main vegetable gardening stuff. There's lots of indoor things that you can definitely find a use for. Hopefully it helps if you have a plan going into the store. We all have a tendency, I think, of buying something we think we're going to use, and then we don't end up using it. Now we've got something we've got to get rid of. So if you can go into it with a plan in place, like the bed frame that I'm looking for, if I find one, I'll get it. There are lots of other things. If you're looking for a container, go to the thrift store and go to the kitchen section, and you may find a small container that would match what you're trying to do with whatever type of project that you're trying to take advantage of saving money at the thrift store. Okay, let's see. Throw out your questions. We still have some time left. The questions, at least the most recent questions, it looks like I have seen all the questions that were obvious. So if you asked a question and I didn't get to it, by all means, ask the question again, and I'll try to make sure I get to it in the few remaining minutes. The 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 other thing I wanted to mention when we're talking about the ways to save money in the garden is I touched on a little bit with making gardener friends, but it's to just expand your network of who comes to your garden. Yeah, there are projects that need to be done. I like doing things by myself, and so I pretty much do everything by myself. But if you've got a big project, and the reason you're not getting that project done is because you don't have help to do it, well, ask a neighbor, ask a friend, ask a relative. Many of us have a hard time asking for help. I'm definitely guilty of that. And you might be able to get that project done again without spending anything. Maybe you have to buy a soda or a beer or a hot dog to pay your buddy who's helping you out in the garden, but that's one of those things that you might be able to take advantage of, especially as you age. Those of us who are getting up in years, there are fewer things we can do the same way in the garden, especially those things that take a lot of physical labor. Rather than stop doing it, just find a smarter way to do it. And the smarter way might be to ask for help, to get someone to come give you a hand in the garden. You can share, you don't need to pay them. One of the things, and my son was talking about this recently with some of the things he's doing, more and more homesteading. They they swap things that they're doing. So my son is becoming quite knowledgeable. He on his channel, Ready Set Homestead, and he's doing the the chickens. He's got turkeys. He's starting to grow more plants, and so he now knows how to take his chickens and to process them into meat that he throws in his freezer. And he's making videos showing that processing. Well, he's now working with a woman who has a business raising and selling chickens, and he's going to swap his experience. He's going to do processing for her, and in exchange, he'll get some chickens. There's no reason why you can't do that in your garden. Have someone come help you turn your soil, help you weed, help you build a bed, help you fill a bed if you are physically unable to do that or it's just too much effort for you. And in exchange, at the end of the season, give them some of your tomatoes or your squash or your peppers or whatever it is you happen to be growing in your beds. And so it's not really a barter system formally, but it's a way to do what you know how to do and that you like doing, and sharing that with someone else that has an ability that you may or may not have. Use your garden as payment for the things that you need in your garden, and it will probably be amazing if you start letting it be known that you're willing to trade some of your fresh produce for a particular task. You might have people lined up to do that task so that they can get all that fresh produce. So an easy way to save money is by having somebody else do the work, and then you pay them with all that extra produce that you might not be planning to use in the first place. Big Will Dog says, I'm bad at asking for help too, but always ready to give it. You know, I'm the same way. Absolutely. Someone asks for help, I'm going to give it, but I don't like asking. Physical limits force me to break tall tasks into pieces, work one piece at a time with breaks in between. Absolutely. That's definitely the approach to take. And that's a lot of more and more what I'm doing to take advantage of it, of my waning years, but still getting out there, breaking it into small pieces. Virginia McCone is saying, I use a milk crate to sit on to weed out my boxes. I have arthritis and it makes it a lot easier. There you go. Reusing something for a purpose and having something to sit on. You know, we all see those things that they sell for gardeners to sit on in the garden. Get a milk crate and sit on a milk crate. And a milk crate doubles as a container to carry things. And so I had a milk crate that I used for a while to carry tools and seeds out to the garden. And so, and then you turn over the milk crate to sit on it while you plant the seeds and weed the garden with the tools that you carried out in the milk crate. So again, another one of those multi-purpose kind of tools. Can be as simple as a milk crate. So do it. Why not? Gardens Happen says, I legally can't sell extra eggs for my chickens, but it says nothing about trading. Absolutely. And my son does that with his chickens as well. Trades the chickens for lots of stuff. and there's no reason you can't do it. I'm not aware of anywhere that has a law against trading services or trading the vegetables for eggs or vice versa. So definitely take advantage of it. Okay, let's see. We're almost at the end. Let me see if there's something else. Bettina says, high school students need volunteer hours to graduate here. Could let students know that you have summer hours available. Great idea. And scouts. Scouts also need projects. And so when I was at the Galileo Garden, I had a number, I think I had, can't remember if it was 5 or 6, but I had a number of scouts that were working on their Eagle badge to become an Eagle Scout. And they did projects in the garden. One made an owl house, one made stepping stones, one made benches. There's all kinds of things that scouts can do as part of their Eagle project. And your garden, depending on the project, especially if you can get a couple neighbors together who want the same thing done, contact the scouts. They might be able to do it. And then all types of youth organizations that require volunteer hours, absolutely. Be it a high school or the YMCA, there are all kinds of organizations that have youth that need volunteer hours of some type. And you might qualify in your garden to have some of those kids in the garden. And from experience, having worked with kids of many different ages, they're not going to want to do it. But once they get in the garden, they love it and they'll do a great job. And it'll be hard getting them out of the garden once they get in and start doing the work. So if you can find kids to work in your garden, absolutely. It's a great way to get some of that work done, some of that heavy labor that you might not be able to do. Give it to the kids. Love it. Love it. Well, thank you all for being here. And I'm going to be here for a while. I'm actually going to be gone in a couple weeks, but I planned my trip so that I'm not gone on Mondays. So I expect to be here on Mondays for many months to come. And I look forward to it. I just don't like the idea of not being gone. So I apologize again for not being here last week, but I will be here next week. I hope you'll be here next week as well, so that we can talk more fun gardening topics and I can see all your input and I can share my ideas and share your ideas too. Thanks for being here. As you get out this week, I hope the weather is good for you. I hope you're not impacted by some of the crazy weather we're having. I hope you can get your stuff done. And above all, I hope you enjoy gardening. I'll see you next week.